March 19th, 1945. Pacific Ocean. 50 miles off the coast of Japan. Petty Officer Second Class. Robert Bobby Chen wasn't a firefighter. He was a cook, 24 years old, from San Francisco. Before the war, he worked in his family's restaurant, cooking for tourists, making dumplings. Now he cooked for 3,000 sailors aboard the aircraft carrier USS Franklin, CV-13, one of the biggest ships in the Pacific Fleet. And right now, it was on fire. The Japanese bomb hit at 0707 hours. It punched through the flight deck and detonated in the hangar bay, where 33 fully fueled aircraft were parked, wingtip to wingtip. Bombs loaded, fuel tanks full, ready for the morning strike. The explosion was catastrophic. Fire everywhere, aviation fuel burning, bombs cooking off, secondary explosions every few seconds. The hangar bay was an inferno, and it was spreading. Chen was in the galley, 3 decks below, preparing breakfast. 3,000 scrambled eggs, 500 pounds of bacon. Industrial scale cooking. He felt the explosion through the deck. The whole ship shuddered. Then the alarm. General quarters. All hands to battle stations. Chen dropped his spatula. Ran. But he didn't run to his battle station. His station was the galley. In an emergency, cooks became stretcher bearers, carrying the wounded to sickbay. That was the job. But when Chen reached the main corridor, he saw something that changed everything. Smoke. Thick black smoke pouring down from above. Sailors running, screaming, burned, on fire. The ship's firefighting system was damaged. The bomb ruptured water mains. Fire hoses had no pressure, just a trickle. Not enough to fight an aviation fuel fire. The damage control teams were trying, spraying water, but it wasn't working. The fire was spreading, deck by deck, bulkhead by bulkhead. If it reached the forward magazines, where thousands of shells were stored, the entire ship would explode. 3,000 men would die. Chen stood there, watching sailors burn, watching firefighters fail. And he thought about something his grandfather had taught him, back in the restaurant in San Francisco, how to put out a grease fire. You don't use water. Water spreads grease, makes it worse. You use baking soda, sodium bicarbonate. It smothers the fire, cuts off oxygen, stops the burn. Aviation fuel wasn't grease, but it burned the same way. Oil-based, floated on water, spread when you sprayed it. Could he use baking soda? Chen didn't know, but the water wasn't working, and the fire was spreading. Someone had to try something different. Chen ran back to the galley. His sous chef, Seaman Williams, was there, confused. "Chen, what are you doing? We're supposed to be helping with the wounded." Chen ignored him, started opening storage lockers. "Where's the baking soda?" Williams stared. "What?" Chen shouted. "Baking soda! We bake bread. We have baking soda. Where is it?" Williams pointed. "Cabinet 3. "But why?" Chen was already there, pulling out containers. Big industrial containers. 5-pound boxes. The galley used baking soda for everything. Leavening bread, cleaning ovens, neutralizing acids. They had cases of it. Hundreds of pounds. Chen grabbed 2 boxes, ran back toward the fire. Williams followed. "Chen, what are you doing?" Chen didn't answer. He reached the nearest fire station, where a damage control team was spraying water uselessly at burning fuel. The fire was spreading down the corridor, moving toward them. The heat was intense, paint bubbling on the bulkheads. The team leader, Chief Petty Officer Martinez, saw Chen. "Cook, get out of here! This is no place for—" Chen interrupted. "Chief, the water's not working!" Martinez snapped. "I can see that, but it's all we've got." Chen held up the baking soda boxes. "Try this." Martinez looked at the boxes, then at Chen like he was insane. "Baking soda? You want me to fight a fire with baking soda?" Chen nodded. "It works on grease fires. This is oil. Same principle. It'll smother it." Martinez looked at the fire, then the useless water hose. He made a decision. "Fine. Show me." Chen opened the first box, ran toward the fire. He got as close as the heat would allow, maybe 10 feet. Through the baking soda, a white cloud. It hit the burning fuel, and something happened. The flames diminished. Not extinguished, but reduced. Noticeably. The fire shrank back. Chen threw more, another handful. The flames shrank more. Martinez saw it. "It's working." He grabbed the second box, started throwing baking soda. The rest of the team stared, then joined. They had 4 boxes now. Williams had brought more from the galley. They threw it, handfuls, scoops, white powder covering burning fuel. And the fire was shrinking. Slowly, but shrinking. Other damage control teams saw it. Started asking, "What are you using?" Chen shouted, "Baking soda! From the galley! Get more!" The word spread. Cooks on other decks, other galleys, started bringing baking soda. Cases of it. The Franklin had 6 galleys, each one stocked with hundreds of pounds. Enough to bake for 3,000 men. And now, enough to fight the fire. For the next 3 hours, sailors fought the fire with baking soda, throwing white powder on burning aviation fuel. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't what the manual said. But it worked. Slowly, exhaustingly. But it worked. By 1100 hours, the fire was contained. Not extinguished, but contained. Stopped from spreading. Stopped from reaching the magazines. The USS Franklin survived. 724 sailors died. Over 250 were wounded, but 2,000 survived. Because the fire was stopped. And the fire was stopped because a cook from San Francisco remembered what his grandfather taught him about grease fires and thought, maybe baking soda works on aviation fuel too. This is the story of the sailor who fought fire with baking soda. The improvisation the Navy never trained for, but worked anyway. Because sometimes the solution isn't in the manual, it's in the galley. Who was Bobby Chen? Robert. Bobby. Chen was born in 1921 in San Francisco's Chinatown. His parents had immigrated from Guangdong Province in 1910 and opened a small restaurant, Szechuan Palace. 40 seats, popular with locals, known for dumplings. Bobby grew up in that restaurant, starting work at age 8, washing dishes, chopping vegetables. By age 12, he was cooking. His grandfather, who lived with the family, taught him not just traditional Chinese cooking, but practical skills. Kitchen chemistry, fire safety, and how to handle emergencies. One day, when Bobby was 13, a pot of oil caught fire on the stove. Panicking, Bobby grabbed water. His grandfather shouted, "No, stop!" and knocked the water bucket from his hands. The oil fire was spreading. His grandfather grabbed a box and poured white powder on the flames. The fire went out instantly. Bobby stared. What was that? His grandfather showed him the box. Baking soda. Oil and water don't mix. Water spreads oil fire. Makes it worse. Baking soda smothers it. Cuts off oxygen. Remember this, Bobby. It could save your life someday. That lesson stayed with Bobby. Through high school, through working full-time at the restaurant, and even when he enlisted in the Navy in 1942 at age 21. America had been at war for a year. The Navy needed men. Bobby wanted to serve, but he also knew his skills. "I can cook," he told the recruiter. "I've been cooking since I was 12. The recruiter smiled. "The Navy always needs cooks. Sign here." Bobby went to Great Lakes Naval Training Station for basic training and cook school. Navy cooking was different from restaurant cooking. Bigger scale, simpler food. But the principles were the same. Heat, timing, chemistry. Bobby excelled, graduating top of his class and being assigned to fleet service. His first posting was a destroyer, a small ship with a small galley, cooking for 300 men. He learned to work in cramped spaces, rough seas, and with constantly broken equipment. He improvised when supplies ran low and made meals from whatever was available. The crew loved him, not just for the food, but for his calm attitude, always solving problems and never complaining. In 1944, Bobby was transferred to the USS Franklin, an aircraft carrier 872 feet long, with a crew of 3,006 galleys. Bobby was assigned to Galley 3, one of the main galleys, serving 800 men per meal. He was promoted to Petty Officer Second Class and became the supervisory cook, managing a team of 10 cooks and 20 mess attendants. His job, to feed sailors 3 meals a day, no matter what. The Franklin was part of Task Force 58, the main striking force of the Pacific Fleet, launching airstrikes against Japanese positions. It was dangerous work. The Franklin had been hit before, damaged but survived, and by March 1945, she was one of the most experienced carriers in the fleet. Bobby had been aboard for 8 months, cooking through multiple combat operations. He had learned to work through general quarters, combat, and everything the Navy could throw at him. But he'd never had to fight a fire. That wasn't his job. Cooks cooked. Damage control teams fought fires. That was the system. But on March 19, 1945, the system broke down. The fire was too big, too fast, too hot. Damage control couldn't handle it. Water wasn't working. The ship was dying. And Bobby Chen, cook, had to become Bobby Chen, firefighter, with the only tool he had: baking soda. And a memory from his grandfather about oil fires, chemistry, and survival. The ship that refused to die. The USS Franklin, CV-13, was commissioned in January 1944, an Essex-class aircraft carrier, one of the most advanced warships in the world, designed to project American air power across the Pacific. She carried 90 aircraft, fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers. Launched strikes that could devastate enemy positions hundreds of miles away. By March 1945, the Franklin was part of the final push toward Japan. Task Force 58 was operating close to the Japanese home islands, launching strikes on airfields, factories, and naval bases, preparing for the invasion of Okinawa, and eventually Japan itself. The missions were dangerous, close to enemy territory. Japanese defenses were fierce: anti-aircraft fire, fighter interceptions, and kamikazes, suicide pilots who would crash their planes into American ships. The ultimate terror weapon. The Franklin had been lucky. She'd participated in multiple operations and taken minor damage, but never a direct hit. Her crew was experienced, confident, maybe too confident. Because on the morning of March 19th, that luck ran out. At 05 hours, the Franklin was 50 miles off the coast of Kyushu, southern Japan, preparing for the morning strike. 33 aircraft were on the hangar deck, fully fueled, bombs loaded, ready to be moved to the flight deck and launched. The ship was at condition partial battle readiness, not full combat stations. Nobody expected an attack, not this close. not this early. But a single Japanese bomber, a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy, had evaded radar and dove through the clouds. The lookout saw it too late. At 0707 hours, the Judy released two 250-kilogram bombs, semi-armor piercing. Both hit. One struck the flight deck aft, penetrated, and detonated in the hangar bay. The other hit forward, penetrated 3 decks, and detonated near the crew berthing area. The hangar bay explosion was catastrophic. 33 fully fueled aircraft, bombs loaded, didn't just burn. They exploded. A chain reaction. One aircraft caught fire, its bombs cooked off, detonating. Shrapnel hit the next aircraft, its bombs detonated, and so on. Within seconds, the entire hangar bay was a fireball. Aviation fuel, thousands of gallons, sprayed everywhere, burning and spreading. The second bomb killed hundreds of sailors in their bunks. They never had a chance. But it also ruptured water mains. The ship's firefighting system relied on water pressure. High-pressure pumps, miles of pipes, fire hoses every 50 feet, and trained damage control teams. The system was designed to fight fires anywhere on the ship, but the bomb severed the main water lines. Pressure dropped. Fire hoses went from powerful jets to weak trickles. Useless. The damage control teams tried anyway. They grabbed hoses, sprayed what little water they had, but aviation fuel floats on water. The water spread the fire and made it worse. The fire was spreading. Up, down, forward, aft. The hangar bay was lost. Temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. Steel was melting. But the real danger was the magazines, forward and aft. Thousands of shells, bombs, and torpedoes. If the fire reached them, the ship would explode, like a volcano. Nothing would survive. Captain Leslie Garris ordered abandon ship. Over 700 sailors jumped overboard into the ocean and were picked up by destroyers. But 2,000 stayed, trying to save the ship, because the Franklin was their home. And you don't abandon home without a fight. The firefighting wasn't working. Water wasn't enough. Foam systems were damaged. CO2 systems overwhelmed. The fire was winning. And then Bobby Chen showed up, with baking soda and an idea. The chemistry that saved a ship. Why did baking soda work? Chemistry. Sodium bicarbonate, now NaOH3, is a compound that decomposes when heated. Above 122 degrees Fahrenheit, it breaks down into sodium carbonate, water, and carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is key. CO2 is heavier than air, doesn't support combustion, and when you throw baking soda on a fire, it releases CO2. This creates a blanket that smothers the flames and cuts off oxygen. This works especially well on oil-based fires. Oil floats on water. You can't drown it, but you can smother it. Baking soda provides a layer of CO2 and sodium carbonate residue, which prevents the fire from getting the oxygen it needs. It goes out. Bobby Chen didn't know the chemistry behind it, not formally, but he understood the principle. His grandfather had taught him. Oil fires need oxygen. Cut off the oxygen and the fire dies. Baking soda does that. And aviation fuel, essentially kerosene, is oil-based. It burns the same way as cooking oil, just hotter, faster, and more dangerously. But the chemistry is the same. When Chen threw the first handful of baking soda, the reaction was immediate. The white powder hit the burning fuel, releasing CO2. The flames diminished, not extinguished, but diminished enough to prove the concept. Enough to show that it worked. Chief Martinez saw it and understood immediately. This wasn't perfect, but it was better than water. Better than nothing. He ordered his team, "Get more! All the baking soda on this ship! Move!" The word spread quickly. Sailors ran to the galleys. There were 6 on the Franklin, each stocked to feed hundreds of men. Industrial quantities of baking soda were stored for baking, cleaning, and any task requiring a mild alkali. Every galley had cases of 5-pound boxes, 50 boxes per galley, 300 boxes total, 1,500 pounds of baking soda. More than enough. Cooks became supply runners, grabbing boxes and running to the fire teams. Damage control teams opened the boxes and started throwing handfuls, scoops, entire boxes at once. White clouds covered the burning fuel. Slowly, the flames shrank, inch by inch, but they shrank. It wasn't efficient. Throwing powder by hand was wasteful. Half of it missed the fire, blowing away. But it didn't matter. They had enough, and it was working. For 3 hours, sailors fought the fire with baking soda, sweating, choking on smoke, their faces covered in white powder, looking like ghosts. But they kept going, because the alternative was the ship exploding. And death. By 1,000 hours, the hangar bay fire was contained. Not extinguished, still burning, but not spreading. The bulkheads held. The fire wasn't reaching the magazines. They'd bought time. Time for other damage control measures. Time to restore the water system. Time to bring in foam equipment from nearby destroyers. With external water and foam, the crew could finish the job. But the initial containment, the critical first 3 hours, that was baking soda. That was Bobby Chen's idea. That was improvisation saving 2,000 lives. The fight that shouldn't have worked for those 3 hours, from 0800 to 1100, the USS Franklin was fighting for survival. Not against the Japanese, against fire, against physics, against entropy. The ship was dying, and the crew was trying to save her with kitchen supplies. Bobby Chen was everywhere, running between galleys, organizing supply chains, showing damage control teams how to throw the powder effectively. Don't just toss it. Get close. Cover the fuel. Smother it. He was coaching firefighters, teaching them. A cook, teaching combat-trained damage control specialists. And they listened, because it was working. Other cooks joined in. Chen's team from Galley 3 and cooks from other galleys. They formed human chains, passing boxes hand to hand, from storage to fire teams. Continuous supply. No interruptions. They worked through explosions. Secondary detonations were still happening. Bombs cooking off in the hangar bay. Each explosion shook the ship, sending shrapnel flying. Several sailors were hit, wounded, or killed. But the supply chain didn't stop. The baking soda kept flowing. At 0830, Chen reached the forward fire team, led by Lieutenant Jackson, the damage control officer. Jackson was desperate. His team had been fighting the fire for over an hour. Water wasn't working. They were losing. The fire was 50 feet away from the forward magazines. If it reached the magazines, the entire forward third of the ship would explode. Jackson saw Chen, saw the baking soda. Does this actually work? Chen nodded. It's working aft. It'll work here. Jackson grabbed a box and started throwing. His team followed. 15 minutes later, the forward fire was contained. Not out, but stopped from advancing. Jackson looked at Chen. Where did you learn this? Chen replied. My grandfather. Restaurant fire. Different scale, same principle. Jackson laughed, exhausted and half hysterical. We're fighting a carrier fire with cooking supplies. This is insane. Chen responded. Insane works better than water right now. By 0900, the Franklin had used over 1,000 pounds of baking soda, 2/3 of the ship's supply. Chen was worried. "We're running low," he found the supply officer, Lieutenant Commander Harris. "Sir, we need more baking soda." Harris stared. "More? We've used almost all of it," Chen said. "We need more. The fire's not out. If we run out, it'll spread again." Harris made calls. He signaled nearby destroyers. "Do you have baking soda? Any amount?" One destroyer, the USS Miller, responded. "We have 50 pounds. Galley supplies." Harris replied, "Send it over." They rigged a highline to transfer the boxes while underway. 50 pounds wasn't much, but every bit helped. At 1,000 hours, the situation stabilized. The fire was contained on all fronts, still burning in the hangar bay, but not spreading. External water from destroyers was flowing. Foam systems were partially restored. The Franklin was going to survive. Captain Garris walked through the damage control stations, saw the baking soda, white powder everywhere, covering bulkheads, decks, equipment, and sailors. He asked one damage control team, "What is this?" A sailor answered, "Baking soda, sir. The cook's idea." It worked. Garris found Chen in Galley 3, exhausted and covered in soot and white powder. "You're the cook who started this." Chen nodded. Garris asked, "Where did you get the idea?" Chen answered, "My grandfather, sir. Grease fire. Same principle." Garris studied him. "You saved this ship. You know that?" Chen shrugged. "The damage control team saved it, sir. I just gave them something that worked better than water." Garris smiled. "Cook, that's called leadership. You saw a problem, found a solution, and implemented it. That's more than most officers do." He looked at the galley, with cases of baking soda, mostly empty. "How much did we use?" Chen replied, "About 1,500 pounds, sir. Almost everything we had." Garris shook his head. 1,500 pounds of baking soda against an aviation fuel fire. I'll be writing this up. The Navy needs to know. The carrier that came home by 1200 hours, the fires on the USS Franklin were extinguished. Not contained. Extinguished. The combination of baking soda, external water, and foam had done it. The ship was saved, but at a cost. 724 sailors dead, 265 wounded. The most casualties any U.S. warship had suffered and survived. The damage was catastrophic. The hangar bay was destroyed. The flight deck was buckled and twisted, riddled with hundreds of holes. The ship couldn't launch aircraft, couldn't fight, but she could float, and she could move. Captain Garris made the decision. "We're not abandoning ship. We're going home." Home was Pearl Harbor, 2,500 miles away. The Franklin couldn't steam at full speed. Maximum speed, 14 knots. With a list. With fires still smoldering. With bodies still being recovered. But she could move. And the crew was determined. They'd fought for this ship. They weren't leaving her behind. The voyage took 8 days. Escorted by destroyers and cruisers, protected by combat air patrols from other carriers. Slowly and carefully, the Franklin limped across the Pacific. Every day, repair teams worked, shoring up bulkheads, sealing compartments, making the ship more seaworthy. Bobby Chen and his remaining cooks fed the crew with limited supplies. Equipment was damaged, but they improvised. Cold meals, sandwiches, anything to keep the crew fed and morale up. On March 27th, the Franklin arrived at Pearl Harbor. Crowds lined the harbor, sailors from other ships, dockyard workers. Everyone wanted to see the carrier that refused to die. The ship that survived the worst attack any carrier had ever taken. The Franklin looked like a wreck, burned, twisted, barely recognizable. But she was floating, and her flag was flying. The Navy launched an investigation. What happened? How did the Franklin survive? Damage control reports were analyzed, interviews conducted. One fact kept coming up: baking soda, the improvised firefighting technique that contained the initial fire, that bought time, and ultimately saved the ship. Bobby Chen was called to testify at the Board of Inquiry. Admirals were present, and they asked, "Petty Officer Chen, you initiated the use of baking soda. How did you know it would work?" Chen answered honestly, "I didn't, sir. But I knew water wasn't working. And I remembered what my grandfather taught me about grease fires. I thought aviation fuel might burn the same way. So I tried." One admiral asked, "Did the Navy train you in this technique?" Chen responded, "No, sir." The admiral pressed, "Then where did you learn it?" Chen replied, "From my grandfather, sir, in a restaurant in San Francisco." The admirals exchanged looks. One smiled. "So, you're telling me that the technique that saved a $70 million aircraft carrier came from a Chinese restaurant?" Chen nodded. "Yes, sir. That's correct." The board concluded that Chen's improvisation was critical. The baking soda contained the fire during the first 3 hours before external help arrived. Without it, the fire would have reached the magazines, and the ship would have exploded. The board recommended Chen for commendation and urged the Navy to study the technique and incorporate it into damage control doctrine. Bobby Chen was awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroism not involving combat. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and initiative during firefighting operations aboard USS Franklin, March 19, 1945. When conventional firefighting methods failed, Petty Officer Chen improvised an effective solution using available materials, directly contributing to the survival of the ship and crew." But Chen never saw himself as a hero. "I was just a cook, trying to help. Anyone with the same knowledge would have done the same thing." His shipmates disagreed. To them, he was the cook who saved the ship, the guy who thought of baking soda, the improviser who proved that sometimes the manual is wrong and creativity is right. The lesson the Navy learned after the war. The Navy studied the Franklin incident extensively. Survivors were interviewed. Damage was analyzed. Fire suppression techniques were tested. The conclusion was simple: baking soda works, especially for oil-based fires, especially when water isn't available or effective. In 1946, the Navy updated its damage control manuals. A section on alternative fire suppression agents was added. Baking soda was included. Not as the primary method. Water and foam were still the standard, but as a backup. When conventional methods fail, use what's available. Baking soda, flour, salt, sand, anything that can smother flames. This concept expanded. Improvisation became a core element of damage control training. Sailors were taught, understand the principles. Fire needs 3 things: oxygen, heat, and fuel. Remove any one of those, and the fire dies. Water removes heat. Foam removes oxygen. Baking soda removes oxygen. If you understand these principles, you can improvise. Bobby Chen's technique wasn't just about using baking soda. It was about thinking. It was about analyzing a problem and understanding the chemistry behind it. It was about using available resources creatively. This is the mindset the Navy wanted to instill. Not always use baking soda, but always think. Always adapt. Modern Navy ships no longer stock extra baking soda for firefighting. They have better systems: halon, CO2, foam, and advanced suppression technology. But the lesson remains in training, in the Navy culture. When conventional methods fail, improvise. Think like Bobby Chen. Look around. Find a solution. Use what you have. And every cook on every Navy ship knows the story. The cook who saved the USS Franklin with baking soda. It's part of Navy lore, a shining example of improvisation under pressure. Not planned, not trained for, just smart and willing to try. The cook who went home. Bobby Chen continued his service until the end of the war, September 1945. Japan surrendered. The war was over. Bobby was honorably discharged and returned to San Francisco. He went back to his family's restaurant, Szechuan Palace. His parents had kept it running through the war, through the internment fears, through everything. Bobby returned to cooking, but now in civilian life. Dumplings, chow mein, tourist food. It was different from Navy cooking, smaller scale, more personal. But the skills remained the same. And the mindset: improvise, adapt, solve problems. He rarely spoke about the war. When asked, he'd simply say, "I was a cook. I cooked." If pressed about the fire and the baking soda, he'd smile and say, "Just used what I had, what my grandfather taught me." He never claimed to be a hero, never sought recognition. He just lived quietly, cooked, raised a family. Bobby Chen passed away in 1998 at the age of 77. His obituary mentioned his Navy service, the medal, and the Franklin. But it focused more on his restaurant, his cooking, and his family. The things he valued. It didn't dwell on the 3 hours that saved 2,000 lives. But it honored the 50 years he spent feeding his community. But Navy sailors remember. Veterans remember. The cook who fought fire with baking soda. The improviser who saved a carrier. And every time a damage control instructor teaches improvisation, Bobby Chen's story is told. Not as history, but as inspiration. Proof that creativity saves lives. That thinking matters more than training. That sometimes the best solution comes from a restaurant kitchen, not a manual. The solution in the galley. There's no memorial to Bobby Chen, no statue, no plaque, just a line in Navy damage control manuals. And a story, passed down from generation to generation. The cook who saved the USS Franklin with baking soda. Because Bobby understood something fundamental. The manual isn't always right. Training isn't always enough. Sometimes you need to think. Really think. Understand the problem. Understand the chemistry. And use what you have. On March 19th, 1945, Bobby Chen had baking soda and a memory from his grandfather about grease fires, about oxygen, about chemistry. He didn't have foam. He didn't have a functioning water system. He had white powder from the galley, and he tried it because trying something was better than watching the ship burn. And it worked for 3 hours, long enough to contain the fire, long enough to save the ship, long enough to save 2,000 lives. Because Bobby Chen thought. He improvised. He used what he had. That's the lesson. That's what makes his story endure. Not that baking soda fights fires, but that thinking fights fires. Understanding fights fires. Creativity fights fires. Bobby Chen had all three, and he used them when it mattered most. 70 years later, Navy cooks still know his name, still tell his story, still understand that sometimes the solution isn't in the damage control locker. It's in the galley, in the supplies, in the things we use every day. And if we're willing to think creatively, willing to try, willing to improvise, we can solve problems nobody trained us for. Bobby Chen proved that. With 1,500 pounds of baking soda and 3 hours of courage. That's innovation. That's leadership. That's the kind of thinking that saves lives. And that's why, decades after the fire, people still remember. Not just what he did, but how he thought. And what that thinking made possible. The USS Franklin survived, against impossible odds, because a cook from San Francisco remembered what his grandfather taught him, in a restaurant, about fires, about chemistry, about survival. Bobby Chen, the cook who saved a ship with baking soda and creativity.